You don't lose God's blessings all at once. It doesn't happen in a loud moment or in a clear decision. It happens quietly, almost invisibly, through things you stopped paying attention to. And the most dangerous part is this: you can still pray, still believe, still call yourself faithful, and yet feel like something is blocked, like something is not flowing anymore, like heaven went silent, not completely, but just enough to make you wonder what changed. And deep down, you already feel it. Something is off. Not around you, inside you. There are things no one warned you about, not obvious sins, not the ones people preach about every Sunday. These are hidden, subtle, acceptable. And that's exactly why they're dangerous, because they don't make you feel guilty. They make you feel normal, and that's how they stay. That's how they grow. That's how they slowly block what God was trying to release into your life. And if you don't recognize them, you won't fight them. You'll just live with the consequences and call it God's timing. But some delays are not timing. Some delays are resistance. Spiritual resistance created by things you allowed to stay. And once you see them, you won't be able to unsee them. The first one doesn't look like sin at all. It looks like being realistic. It sounds wise. It feels grounded. But it slowly disconnects you from expectation. You stop believing for anything greater. You stop expecting God to move. You start saying things like, "This is just how life is." And without realizing it, your faith shifts from alive to passive. You still believe in God, but you no longer believe God will actually do something in your situation. And that right there shuts doors, because faith is not agreement. Faith is expectation. And when expectation dies, movement stops. Think about the last time you truly expected something from God. Not hoped, expected. That tension inside you, that quiet certainty that something is about to happen. When was the last time you felt that? Because if it's been a while, then something replaced it. And what replaced it might be the very thing blocking what you've been waiting for. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because most people don't lose expectation overnight. They lose it after disappointment, after something didn't happen, after a prayer went unanswered. And instead of processing it with God, they adjusted their expectations downward, not consciously, quietly, and that quiet adjustment becomes a ceiling. You stop asking boldly, you stop trusting fully, you stop stepping forward, and then you wonder why nothing is changing. But heaven doesn't respond to silence disguised as faith. It responds to living expectation, and if something in you stopped expecting, then something needs to be confronted, because that's not humility, that's hidden unbelief. The second one is even more subtle. It's delayed obedience, not rebellion, not refusal. Just delay. You know what you're supposed to do. You felt it clearly. You recognized it when it came, but you said, "Not yet." You postponed it. You told yourself you'd get to it later, and that later quietly turned into never. And the problem with delayed obedience is that it feels harmless. You didn't say no. You just didn't say yes right now. But in the spiritual world, delayed obedience is still disobedience, because timing matters. There are things that only open when you move immediately. There are doors that don't stay open forever. And when you hesitate too long, you don't just pause the process, you interrupt it. Think about how many times you felt a clear nudge to act, to speak, to stop something, to start something. And you waited. You overthought it. You told yourself you needed more clarity. But deep down, you already knew. And every time you delay something God made clear, you train your spirit to ignore Him the next time. And eventually, the voice gets quieter. Not because God stopped speaking, but because you stopped responding. And when responsiveness fades, so does alignment. And when alignment fades, so do blessings. Not because God withdrew them, but because you moved out of position to receive them. And that's the part people don't want to hear, because it means some things are not blocked by God. They're blocked by hesitation. And the longer you justify that hesitation, the more normal it feels. Until you forget what immediate obedience even looks like. The third one hides inside something that looks like wisdom. It's emotional self-protection. You've been hurt before, disappointed, let down. So now you guard yourself. You don't trust easily. You don't open up fully. You keep a distance even with God. Not completely, just enough to stay safe. And on the surface, it makes sense. It feels responsible. It feels like growth. But there's a line where protection becomes limitation. Because God doesn't work through walls. He works through surrender. And when your heart becomes guarded, even subtly, you limit what can flow through you. You pray, but you don't fully release. You worship, but you don't fully open. You believe, but with conditions. And those conditions become filters. And those filters block what requires full trust. There are things God will not force into a guarded heart. Not because He can't, but because He honors openness. And if part of you is still holding back, still bracing, still protecting itself from being disappointed again, then part of you is also blocking what only comes through vulnerability, and that's hard to admit. Because it doesn't feel like sin, it feels like survival, but not everything that protects you serves you. Some things protect you from pain, but also from breakthrough. And if you never revisit that, you'll stay safe and stuck, and most people choose that without realizing it. You don't notice the shift at first. It doesn't feel like something is wrong. It feels like you've simply become more balanced, more in control, more mature. But what actually happened is this. You started replacing dependence on God with reliance on yourself. Not completely. Just enough to where you no longer feel desperate for Him. And that's the fourth hidden sin. Self-sufficiency disguised as stability. It looks responsible, it looks strong, people even respect it. You handle your problems, you make your plans, you move forward without waiting too long. And from the outside, it looks like growth. But inside, something subtle has shifted. You no longer lean the same way. You no longer ask the same way. You no longer wait the same way. You still include God, but you don't depend on Him. And that difference is everything. Because spiritual authority and blessing don't flow through control. They flow through surrender. And the moment you start believing that you can manage your life without full dependence, you close yourself off from what only comes through trust. Think about it honestly. When something unexpected happens, what is your first instinct? To pray or to solve? To pause or to react? Because your first instinct reveals your true reliance. And if your instinct is always control, always strategy, always self, then God becomes a backup plan instead of your source. And blessings don't flow into backup plans. They flow into surrendered lives. This is why some people work harder and receive less. Because effort without surrender creates friction. You push, you strive, you force things to move. But nothing aligns, and over time, that creates frustration. You start feeling like you're doing everything right, but nothing is opening. And the truth is, you are doing everything right externally, but internally, something shifted. You stopped needing God the way you used to, and the moment need disappears, connection weakens. And when connection weakens, flow slows down. The fifth one is even more uncomfortable, because most people won't admit it. It's hidden resentment toward God. Not open anger, not rejection, just a quiet, unspoken disappointment that never fully healed. Something didn't happen the way you believed it would. Something you prayed for didn't come. Something you trusted God with still broke. And instead of processing that pain honestly, you buried it. You kept going. You stayed faithful on the outside. But inside, something closed. You stopped expecting the same way. You stopped trusting the same way. You started protecting yourself from being let down again. And without realizing it, That disappointment turned into distance, and distance turned into resistance. You still believe in God, but you don't fully trust Him anymore, and that tension blocks more than you think. Because blessings don't just require belief, they require trust, and trust cannot exist where resentment lives quietly. Even if you never say it out loud, even if you don't consciously think it, your spirit carries it, and it affects how you pray, how you listen, how you respond. You hesitate more, you question more, you hold back more, and all of that slows down what was meant to move freely. This is why some prayers feel empty, not because God isn't listening, but because something inside you is no longer fully open. And until that is faced, nothing changes, because you can't build expectation on top of unhealed disappointment. It will always collapse under pressure. The sixth one hides inside something people call discernment. But it's not discernment, it's constant criticism, a mindset that always looks for what's wrong, always analyzing, always questioning, always pointing out flaws. And again, it feels justified. You call it wisdom, you say you're being careful. But over time, this mindset poisons your perception. You stop seeing what God is doing because you're too focused on what's imperfect. You stop recognizing movement because you're too busy evaluating it. And slowly, your spirit shifts from receiving to resisting, because a critical spirit cannot rest, it cannot trust, it cannot flow. It's always tense, always guarded, always measuring, and that blocks more than you realize. Because God doesn't operate through constant suspicion. He operates through alignment, and alignment requires a heart that is able to receive without filtering everything through doubt. The more critical you become, the less you experience, not because there's nothing happening, but because you've trained yourself not to recognize it. And once that becomes your default, even clear blessings feel questionable. Even open doors feel uncertain, even answers feel incomplete, and eventually you stop moving forward altogether, not because there's no path, but because you don't trust anything enough to walk it, and that's where many people get stuck. Not in sin that is obvious, but in patterns that feel intelligent, but quietly block everything. And the worst part is, they don't look dangerous, they look like maturity, and that's why they stay. And the seventh one is the most deceptive of all, because it hides inside something that feels completely justified. It's spiritual inconsistency, not the kind that makes you feel guilty, the kind that becomes your normal. You don't reject God, you don't walk away, you just stop being consistent. You pray, sometimes. You read, occasionally. You reconnect when things get hard. And then, when things stabilize, you drift again, and that cycle becomes your rhythm. You never fully disconnect, but you're never fully aligned either. You live in between, and that in between is where momentum dies. Because spiritual authority is not built on moments. It's built on consistency, quiet, repetitive, unseen consistency, the kind no one applauds, the kind that doesn't feel dramatic, the kind that doesn't give you immediate results. And that's exactly why people abandon it, because it feels like nothing is happening. But everything is happening. Every time you show up when you don't feel like it, something strengthens. Every time you stay consistent without seeing results, something aligns. Every time you choose discipline over emotion, something builds. But when that consistency breaks, even subtly, that growth slows down, not instantly, gradually, and that's what makes it dangerous. You don't feel the loss right away, you just feel a slight dullness, a slight distance, a slight lack of clarity, and over time, that becomes your new normal. You start praying without expectation. You start reading without impact. You start showing up without connection, and eventually, you begin to feel like something is missing, but you can't explain what. And most people respond to that by trying to find something new, a new message, a new teaching, a new environment. But the issue is not what you need next. It's what you stopped doing consistently, because there are things God only builds through repetition, through daily alignment, through quiet faithfulness. And when that pattern breaks, so does the flow. This is why some people feel like they've lost something, not because it was taken, but because it was no longer maintained. And until that consistency returns, nothing fully restores. Now here's where everything connects, because none of these are loud sins. None of these are things people warn you about clearly. They are subtle shifts, small allowances, quiet compromises, and individually, they don't seem destructive. But together, they create resistance, a kind of invisible barrier between you and what God is trying to release. You still pray, you still believe, you still show up. But something feels blocked, and this is why. Not because God changed, not because his promises failed, but because alignment was disrupted in ways that felt harmless. And the longer you ignore that, the more normal it feels, until you forget what full alignment even feels like. But the moment you see it, everything changes, because awareness breaks patterns. Once you recognize what has been quietly operating in your life, you can no longer excuse it. You can no longer ignore it. You are forced to choose. Either keep living with it or confront it. And that's the turning point. Not when you feel something, not when you hear something, when you decide to respond. Because nothing changes until you respond. Not understanding, not agreement, response, action, alignment. That's what reopens what was blocked. And it doesn't happen all at once. It starts with one decision, one correction, one moment where you stop allowing what you used to tolerate. And that moment matters more than you think. Because it breaks momentum, it interrupts the pattern, it shifts direction. And once direction changes, everything else begins to follow. But most people never get there, not because they can't, but because they don't take that step. They wait, they think, they delay. And that delay keeps everything exactly where it is. And if you've been listening closely, then you already know which one applies to you. You felt it, you recognized it. You didn't need confirmation, you already knew. And that's not coincidence, that's clarity. And clarity demands response, not later. Now. Because the longer you wait, the easier it becomes to stay the same. And the harder it becomes to change. But right here, in this moment, you have something most people ignore. Awareness. And if you act on it, everything shifts. Not instantly, but inevitably. Because when alignment is restored, flow returns. When resistance is removed, movement begins again. And what felt blocked starts opening, quietly, gradually, but undeniably. And one day you'll look back and realize it was never about waiting for God to move. It was about removing what was in the way. And this is the part most people never reach, because it forces a level of honesty that cannot be avoided. It's easy to listen, to agree, to feel something for a moment. It's much harder to actually face what you've allowed to stay, because once you admit it, you lose the comfort of pretending it's not there. And that's where real change begins. Not when you feel motivated, not when you feel inspired, when you stop negotiating with what you know is wrong. Because every hidden thing you tolerate becomes something that shapes you, slowly, quietly, without asking for permission. And over time, you don't even recognize the version of yourself it created. You just feel the weight of it, the distance, the lack of movement. And you call it confusion, you call it a season, you call it waiting. But deep down, you know, something has been sitting there too long, and this is where most people make a critical mistake. They try to fix everything at once. They feel convicted, overwhelmed, and then they set impossible expectations for themselves. They say, I'm going to change everything starting now. And a few days later, they're right back where they started, not because they didn't mean it, because they didn't understand how change actually works. Change doesn't come from intensity, it comes from precision. One thing at a time, one correction at a time, one decision that is actually carried out. That's what shifts direction, because real transformation is not loud, it's consistent. It's deliberate, it's built in moments no one sees, and that's exactly why it lasts. So instead of trying to fix everything, choose the one thing that stood out the most, the one you felt immediately, the one you almost wanted to ignore. Start there. Don't overthink it. Don't delay it. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Move on it while it's still clear, because clarity fades when it's not acted on, and what felt obvious right now will feel optional later, and optional things rarely get changed. But when you act immediately, something shifts, not just externally, internally. You begin to rebuild trust with yourself. You begin to restore alignment, and that changes how you show up in everything. Your prayers become different, not longer, not louder, real. Your focus becomes sharper, your decisions become clearer, your sensitivity returns, and that's when things start moving again, not because you forced them, because you removed what was blocking them. And here's what you need to understand clearly. God is not holding things back from you. He's not creating distance. He's not making it harder for you on purpose. But he also will not override what you choose to keep. And that's where responsibility comes in, not guilt. Responsibility, the understanding that what you allow matters, what you ignore matters, what you delay matters. And once you accept that, everything becomes clearer. You stop asking, why is nothing happening? And you start asking, what is still in the way? And that question changes everything, because it puts you back in position, not as someone waiting, but as someone aligning. And alignment always produces movement. Always. It may not look immediate, it may not feel dramatic, but it is undeniable over time. And that's what most people miss. They look for instant results and overlook gradual transformation. But the strongest changes are the ones that build quietly, the ones that don't need to announce themselves, the ones that simply begin to shift your reality piece by piece, until one day you realize things are no longer blocked. Doors feel lighter, decisions feel clearer, peace feels real again. And you didn't chase it, you didn't force it, you aligned with it. And that's what was missing, not effort, not desire, alignment. And once alignment is restored, everything else follows. So don't leave this as just another moment of awareness. Don't treat this like something you heard and then move on from. Use it right now. Choose the one thing you will no longer tolerate and act on it before this moment passes, because this is where most people lose it. Not in the big decisions, in the small delays. And those delays cost more than they realize. But if you move now, even in a small way, you break that pattern. You step out of that cycle. You create momentum. And momentum is what carries you forward when emotions fade. And they will fade, but momentum stays. So build it, protect it, stay in it. And you will not have to wonder why things feel blocked anymore. You'll know exactly what changed, and more importantly, you'll know that you changed it. And here is what most people still misunderstand, even after hearing all of this. They think once they recognize these hidden sins and correct them, everything should immediately change. They expect instant clarity, instant peace, instant breakthrough. And when that doesn't happen fast enough, they assume nothing worked. But that assumption is the final trap, because what you're undoing was not built in a day. These patterns were forming quietly over time, shaping how you think, how you respond, how you relate to God. And when you begin to remove them, the change doesn't explode. It stabilizes. It restores order before it produces results. And if you don't understand that, you'll quit too early. You'll step back into old patterns, not because they're stronger, but because they're familiar. And familiarity feels easier than discipline. That's why most people stay stuck. Not because they lack desire, because they don't stay consistent long enough to see the shift. But the moment you decide that you're not going back, something locks in. Your thinking changes. Your responses change. You stop negotiating with things you used to excuse. And that's where authority begins to rebuild. Quietly, firmly, without needing validation. You start noticing small differences. Your mind is clearer. Your reactions are slower. Your discernment sharpens. Things that used to confuse you don't anymore. And it's not because you learned something new. It's because you removed what was distorting your perception. That's what hidden sin does. It doesn't always destroy you openly. It distorts you subtly. It shifts your perception just enough to where wrong feels normal and right feels optional. And when perception is off, decisions follow. And when decisions are off, outcomes reflect that. So when you correct what's hidden, you're not just fixing behavior, you're restoring clarity. And clarity changes everything. Because once you see clearly, you move differently, you choose differently, you respond differently. And over time, those small differences create completely different results. This is why two people can believe in the same God, read the same word, and still experience completely different lives. Not because God favors one over the other, but because one is aligned and the other is still carrying resistance they haven't dealt with. And alignment is not a feeling, it's a decision repeated daily. It's choosing truth when it's uncomfortable. It's choosing discipline when it's inconvenient. It's choosing to confront what you'd rather ignore. And every time you make that choice, something strengthens inside you. Something stabilizes, something becomes unshakable. And that's what changes your life. Not one moment, a series of decisions that build momentum. And once that momentum is strong enough, it carries you through moments when you don't feel motivated, when you don't feel inspired, when you don't feel anything at all. Because at that point, you're no longer relying on emotion, you're operating from alignment. And alignment produces consistency, and consistency produces results. Not instantly, but inevitably. So if you've been waiting for something to change, stop waiting for a feeling. Start watching your patterns. Start correcting what you already know is off. Start removing what you've been tolerating, and do it without overthinking it. Because overthinking is just another form of delay, and delay is what kept things blocked in the first place. Move while it's clear. Act while it's obvious. Decide while it's uncomfortable. That's where real change happens. And if you're serious about it, then don't just listen and move on. Stay with this. Revisit it. Let it confront you again until it no longer needs to. Because the goal is not to feel something once. The goal is to become someone different, someone aligned, someone aware, someone who no longer allows what once blocked them. And when that happens, you won't need to chase blessings anymore. You won't need to wonder if God is moving. You'll see it. Not because it suddenly started, but because nothing is standing in the way anymore.